Good morning, colleagues. I hope you are well this morning.
Morning, Skura.
Morning, Frank.
Morning.
Morning, Frank.
Morning, Scott. Morning. Morning, Peter.
Morning.
Morning, Peter.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good wet morning.
Very wet. I hope everyone is safe.
Morning.
Flooding everywhere. Certainly on the north coast. I think it's in Durban as well, all over the place. But anyway, good to see the rain. Don't chase it away just yet.
Send some our way. We need it.
Morning all, morning Peter. Good
Morning.
to see you. Torrential rain here in Durban North.
Hi, Peter.
Morning, Kevin.
Morning.
Morning, everyone. So today we have Pieter Zitman as our guest. I'm just going to go straight to it and introduce him. So Pieter was born in Durban, began his architecture studies under Rodney Harbour before completing his qualifications in London. He's an affordable housing expert, delivering over 2,000 homes and consulting to the UK government and the Mayor of London. He has also delivered educational and healthcare projects, working with the likes of Daniel Libeskind and Zaha Hadid. As an architect, he has worked on a range of schemes, including residential, educational, and commercial developments, renovating the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale and the detailed design of ex-Beatles manager George Martin's Air Recording Studios. His projects have received 4 RIBA, 5 Evening Standard Awards, and the Royal Fine Arts Commission Trust Award. He is no stranger to our region as a patron of our bursary fund, the Pieter Zitman bursary fund. Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to be talking about affordable housing, and a particular part of affordable housing in primarily London, although it does relate to the rest of the UK. And really trying to pick up on the issue whether one should address housing as a human right. So just as a very brief overview of my career in London after having left South Africa, and probably a number of you know that I left because I refused to do military service. So I was one of them. Came over to, lived in the Netherlands for a short period and then came to London because my Dutch was awful. So I started working with various practices, did a tour of Europe, ended up in hospital for 17 days as I hit a car at 50 miles an hour, which is 80 kilometers an hour. And then thought, no, finish your studies, this has to be done. So I was working on, as you can see on this, the left-hand side, sort of B1 offices. And then, as Kira said, the next image along is George Martin's Air Recording Studios. For people who are Beatles fans, that's here's the manager of the Beatles. And then the next image along is when I finished my studies. I first went to the University of East London, did a year to complete my first degree, then went to Kingston University to complete my master's degree. And I worked for my tutor, and we worked on the Venice Biennale. And a little while afterwards, there were various market downturns. I was contacted by somebody I'd been working before when I was studying. And he said, look, do you want to come and work for the University of North London, as was known then? And we, as on the client side, project managing, and I thought, that sounds like fun. And I joined, and it wasn't long afterwards. And so the next scheme along is a building teaching through IT. So it can house 1,000 computers. So not teaching IT, but teaching through it. So rather than chalk and talk, it's you can be online. Your lecturer could be on the beach in California if they wanted to. And our vice chancellor came to us and said, look, we want to improve the quality of design. We were the second poorest university in the country. But he knew that we would be able to attract students and staff, because a lot of education, as some of the lecturers in this talk knows about research. And so we then approached Daniel Libeskind to design a graduate center, which is the next scheme along. which he delivered, and it was great fun. We interviewed people like Frank Gehry. We worked also with up-and-coming practices, did a lot of research on who was up-and-coming small practices to do smaller projects for things like the student center, and we did creches and landscaping and all sorts of things to try and integrate the campus into a single access point for the safety and security of the students and staff. And so the second line down on the left is the bridge that Zaha Hadid designed for us. And that was really to link the campus across the Holloway Road. But sadly, at that time, the university merged and became the London Metropolitan University, and that scheme, and that was going to link into the School of Architecture that was going to be built across the road, and that all fell apart. I then left the university, felt that I'd kind of peaked with Daniel Libeskind. I didn't think there was much more that could be done in terms of that pathway. And so I ended up working for a company that did project management and architecture. So the next slide, the next image along is NHS GP practice. And I delivered 2 of those, and then highlighted to the office that they didn't have an architect heading up the architecture department. And in this country, that's not legal. You have to have, if you call yourself an architect, you have to be an architect. So I headed up the design team, which included interior design, and we had some really good, it was an amazing team. There weren't many of us, but we produced some amazing work. And so the next scheme along was 325 flats in a place called Basildon in Essex. And the next scheme along is 750 units in the Docklands. That scheme didn't get built, but it gives you an idea of the scale. But what I realized at that time was that the affordable housing tended to be shunted off to the side. It was very demoralizing. It was seen as second-class citizens and not great work. And I was approached to join a company, a startup company called Pocket Living, to be the development director to deliver homes. And so the bottom left scheme is, these are some of the pocket schemes that I delivered. Then at a point, I realized that I wanted to diversify and increase the range of affordability. And so set up mixed developments to do just that. So just some of the issues facing affordable housing today, and I can't emphasize enough that it is all about money, and design and architecture come way down the list, and you'll see why in due course. Salaries, how much can people afford? House prices have rocketed in the UK, and part of that is pushed not only by construction costs but by land values. And then there's obviously issues to do with migration and urbanization. Human beings are going through the highest level of urbanization in the history of human beings. And obviously there's issues to do with migration, and I'll come to that in due course. Obviously climate change, technology, legislation has changed hugely in the delivery of housing. And as you can see, we just haven't built enough homes. So, isn't all housing affordable? Well, theoretically, yes. There are a few homes that are in places like North London where they are bought purely for investment, but these are sort of 27, 50, 75 million pound homes. They don't really, I don't really view them as what, because a lot of them aren't lived in, they're purely investment vehicles. But you'll see there's a project we worked on, Ferber Road, which we delivered in 2012. And we delivered each home at £100,000 cost. That would have gone up by 105% to date, at least, possibly even more. Incomes and pensions have dropped generationally. So the incomes that, say, if my grandparents lived in the UK, were much higher. So on a single salary, you could own a home and a car. That's gone. And equally, pensions have dropped significantly. And house prices have gone, as you can see, from a ratio of 1 in 3 to 1 in 10 income price ratio. And as you can see from the stats, it's much more difficult for women. And with greater liberation, that's become a far bigger issue because there are so many more women in the workplace and are being paid significantly less. So the scale of the problem in London is huge. And so we've got about 1.1 million people on housing waiting lists. And these are the waiting lists that people register for in their local council to get onto affordable housing. So that could be social rent or any other types of affordable housing. And that number has barely changed in the 20 years I've worked in this industry. It is quite shocking, but I suspect it's no different to South Africa, that housing, there's just not enough. And this goes across the whole of the country. But if you really put it in terms of poverty, to have 183,000 people in temporary accommodation, and local councils are paying £114 million every month for that temporary accommodation, we could build 475 homes a month on that kind of money. It is a staggering amount of money. And generally within the UK, I've been pressing this with Homes England, which is the government's department for housing, that if you take the ONS, which is the Office of National Statistics, data, that people on median incomes under the age of 38, and actually, to be honest, it's probably up to 43, they have no affordable housing options. And by affordable housing options, what we mean is that you shouldn't be spending more than 30% of your net income on that housing. And so there's data that even shows that 27% of people can't even afford to rent a home. So what are they doing? They're staying at home, as my son does. He's 34, 35 in May, or they're moving into overcrowded housing. And it is dreadful because it really stifles their prospects, their education, their ability to have family, etc. And of course, it has a huge impact on the country's economy. I just wanted to quickly dispel some of the myths. Particularly working in London, people say, oh, there's so many empty homes, we've got too many migrants, this is all awful. It's all nonsense, don't believe it. Borrowing from a rather famous environmentalist, blah, 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 it really is, it's a load of nonsense. The vast majority of people who migrate are internal migrants. As you can see, it's only 27% of people who immigrate to other countries, and that tends to be about 3% of the world population, and it's been thus for a long, long time. Of course, you get spikes. You can see on the graph on the right, we've had a spike recently in people immigrating into the UK, and that's been caused by a number of global issues to do with Afghanistan, where we promised to take on migrants from Afghanistan, the Ukraine war, etc. So, and Hong Kong. So there are reasons why people migrate, but still it's a low percentage of overall number of people. And one of the reasons we need people to come into the country, and it's a bit of a government secret, but they allow people to come into the country legally. The vast majority of people come in through Heathrow Airport. They don't come in on small boats. That's a tiny percentage of the overall immigration into the country. But we have an aging population, and it's getting worse. And if we don't have people to come in and not only support those people with their income, but also support them in their dotage, we also need them to support industries. We don't have the people with skills to come in to do those, whether it's in the construction industry. And we have a real desperate shortage at the moment of people in the construction industry. But it also helps getting to understand this sort of data. I know it seems a bit, what's this got to do with architecture or affordable housing? But it gives you an idea, if you can understand the types of people who are coming in and where the population is moving, whether elderly who want to downsize into smaller homes. It gives you vital data to understand what that's likely to do. And the remittances, this is basically money sent back to the home countries. These are the bottom left is the amount of money actually sent back home. It's vast. It's larger than international aid. It's through 302 billion in 2020. You can see just how big it is. And then this is a bit of data that I picked up on South Africa, why people move. Excuse me. And it's not too different to why people move in the UK. They move for jobs, they move for loved ones, there needs to be family, for education, etc. So they are very valid reasons why people are moving. And one of the things that actually, in looking at this data, I had another graph which showed the people moving around different areas of, say, KwaZulu-Natal as losing people. And it's always seen as why people are migrating. And actually, it's because they're empowered to, because they have the education, they have the skills, and they feel that they can offer something. Migrants don't move if they don't feel that they've got a job and security to go to. They tend to move because they know they can. Because particularly immigration, it's incredibly expensive to immigrate. And so you'll find that the highest levels of immigration are generally from people who have some money. So countries that aren't at the lowest level of the economic scale, but actually more the middle economic scale. Okay, so a little bit of history, and I won't go into this in too much detail, but affordable housing started in the 19th century, and it really picked up after the First and Second World War. And what happened after the Second World War, particularly in areas, and I live in East London, a lot of the housing was bombed, and so people ended up in slums. You'd have an entire family living in one room of one house, so each room had a family. And particularly in East London, a lot of those homes didn't have bathrooms inside or toilets. It was done outside, so people would bath in tubs. It was a really dreadful situation, and the Conservative government at the time said that if we can nationalize tank building, we can nationalize house building. And so they did. They made it a state requirement, and all councils were forced to build housing. And so actually a lot of the best architects working in the country work for local councils rather than offices. So in my time that I've been here in this country, we've been through 3 housing bubbles. We've got housing wrong, as you can see from the image, and some have been demolished. But not all housing is irredeemable, and a lot of the reasons why this housing is demolished is because they become slum developments. Consecutive governments have tended to move people who they've seen as problems and move them into single estates, and that creates a problem with the estate. And that's not necessarily the right way to do it. Obviously, if you share people around, always talk about the statistic of crime and drug use. I live on a council estate, and where we live in East London, the drug use crime rate and the general crime rate is lower than Kensington and Chelsea, where people can actually afford their drugs. Here, there's obviously an economic issue, and so people can't afford their drugs. They they rob for it, but the crime rates are higher in the richer areas. But really, we haven't built enough homes, and we haven't done that for a long, long time, as the housing waiting list shows. And some of the effects are Brexit. We lost a lot of construction workers who went back to their home countries, and then during COVID, we lost a huge number again who continued. Actually, a lot of construction workers continued working here, and our costs just keep escalating. So we have to prove soil neutrality, all these sorts of things. Construction costs have gone up as a result of people migrating, etc. So what are the solutions to getting housing that's affordable? Reduce the cost, and that's a very difficult thing when you have construction costs going up and up and up like that. But there are ways of doing it, and in London particularly, we are very lucky to have a fantastic public transport system. And the diagram on the right is the Pieter plot, and you can plot your exact plot on it. And it's the public transport accessibility level. And the higher the level, basically, the less you're likely to need cars. And so it's easier to provide bicycle parking instead of cars. It's not always loved by people, but you can show that it can be done. But what it allows you to also do, the Pieter rating allows you to develop a much denser development. And this all plays into how to deliver affordable housing. And what density allows you to do is it helps support low energy technology, so it becomes more viable to use ground source heat pumps, etc., because they require at least 30 odd units to make it viable economically. Communal facilities, safety, people live together, and mixed communities. And the mixed community is is not just a gender and ethnicity issue. A lot of people, particularly even in where I live in East London, they're priced out of the market, so they're moving out to Zone 5 and Zone 6, right out of the periphery of London. And as I keep saying to people, where do you want your nurses? Do you want them right next to you when you fall ill? Do you want them to spend an hour and a half traveling into work to attend to you? And the answer is right next to me. So we need to have these mixed communities. So affordable housing, housing is two types, basically open market and affordable housing. And that's broken into two sections, social and intermediate. Social housing is generally delivered by the local councils or registered providers, and that's a rental model. And then the ownership tends to sit within the intermediates, although they are discounted market rents models that are coming out now that are reasonably new. So right to buy came out under the Margaret Thatcher, which meant that if you lived in your council flat for a while, period of time, you had a right to buy it and it was sold to you at a discount. This has created a real problem where, for example, on the estate I live in, around about 40% of the homes are now right to buy, and they're now let back to the very people who are in need of housing. And shared ownership is a model that's been pushed by the consecutive governments for a while. Excuse me. And it's a model where you buy a minimum of about 20%, 25% of the home, and you pay rent on the rest of it. And for a large part, that's unaffordable for most people. In London, you need a salary of at least £55,000 per annum to be able to afford shared ownership. Discounted market sales is a huge growth area, and I'll come on to that in due course. Now, as I said, there's a huge stigma around affordable housing, particularly social housing. And people are seen as lazy, drug addicts, uneducated, horrible places to live. And I can assure you, as a resident of a council estate, that's just not true. There are people we need, and you can see from the list on the right, and this is just from my block. There are 3 people with PhDs. We've got nurses, doctors, we've got 2 architects, teachers, care workers, first responders. We have a BAFTA award winner. So I keep saying these are not people in need, they're people we need, they're people who service industry. They're not the billionaires, but they are people without whom London wouldn't work. And in the East End of London, there's a proud history of working for people's rights and equality, whether it's women working the workplace and demanding rights from the match factories, or fighting off the fascists on Cable Street, which is people are very proud of. So what is intermediate housing? So the difference between open market and social rent has become so huge that there's a now need for a stepping stone between the two types of housing. And it really is a huge need, and we need to build a lot more of it to allow the people to move through those areas. And as more parents are paying for their children's education and housing, they need to downsize and move into smaller homes. So that this intermediate market has become huge, and it's regulated as a reflection of market prices and the economy. And that's, we spend literally weeks and months working with local authorities to work out where to benchmark the housing. So, sorry, at this point when I moved into Pockets, I'm obviously on the developer side, not working as an architect. And so we spent a lot of time at the GLA, which is the mayor's office, working out how to secure affordable housing, intermediate housing within as a mechanism. So the planning section 106 agreements, that deals with the marketing methods plan. So generally you have a period in first round sale of 4 months where you market to people on their housing waiting list. And then in the second round sale, that tends to drop down to 3 months, and people have to live and work in the borough. And it also dictates the number of units that you're going to deliver, the size and the type, etc. What magazines, even down to what magazines you're going to market to. The lease agreement then agrees what that housing model is. So, for example, if you're selling at a 20% discount to the market to somebody on a certain income level, that sits in the lease agreement and says, look at the planning agreement. So when lawyers get into the room and you get to sell your home, it's very clear what you have to do. So who builds homes in the UK? SMEs used to produce 40% of homes, and because of regulation, it's dropped down to 10%. And there's a real drive now to try and bring that number up because they're a vital part of delivering homes. Sorry, if SMEs are small to medium enterprises, for those who don't know. But most housing is now being delivered by developers, and the way that the local councils then force them to provide affordable housing is through planning obligations, and the target is set for 50%. And basically, there's now a rule that if you offer to produce a certain percentage of homes, then basically you go through speedy boarding, you go through planning very quickly. If you don't, then you have to go through all sorts of toolkit assessments. But generally what tends to happen is because of the costs of construction and land costs, which go into the toolkit assessment, that figure tends to drop down to 30 to 35%, and then the obligation is to have 70% social rent and 30% intermediate. So the company I worked for initially, Popular Living, we would do 100% intermediate, and so we just skipped through all of that, and we could show that we weren't going to do social rent. Now, registered providers, they have to go through all sorts of hoops to ensure that they benchmark to certain standards, and they traditionally have done 100%. And in the last governments, they then, because they had to compete in the land market, they become open market developers, and they've gone to ruin and are basically benchmarking the same way as the developers are. There's now a movement to go back to the registered provider position as the current government is offering to provide greater funding. So my part in the shrinking of homes, and this is important to the density issue, is that we looked at taking a one-bed flat, which has a requirement in this country of a minimum size of 50 square meters, and we said we're going to do it at 38 square meters, and we're going to prove to you that it will work really well as a one-bed flat. So we tried to push for the highest qualities that we could deliver to, and never go for something that's the minimal amounts. A lot of developers, when you go and look at their affordable housing that they produce, the standard is shocking. But in my endeavor to ensure that we had the highest quality delivered, me and my colleagues, we produced employees' requirements that basically left almost no wiggle room for the contractors to reduce the quality from. Then I worked with my lawyers we work with JCT design and build contracts, and obviously that you lose quality in that lovely triangle when you learn about contracts. And so I got my lawyers to write contractual obligations on the innovation of the design team to make sure that they informed me every time there was any reduction or change in the quality of the product that was being built. And this basically put the consultants into two camps, both working for the contractor, but with an obligation back to the original client, us, to ensure that the quality never dropped. So these are the 38 square meter one-bed flats. We spent a lot of time, so even down to where this door was that went into the bedroom, we spent hours discussing where that door should go. And it ended up being 700 millimeters from the wall, so you could put a cupboard behind. And that's the level of detail that we went to. So even down to where the toilet is, there's certain requirements that you have to have a forward reach distance for a toilet. So the arrangements, those actually ended up as wet rooms, even down to that level of detail of how that would work. And in the kitchen, we spent a lot of time working out, making sure that you could cook for up to 6 people on that kitchen. And that kitchen was supplied, as you see it, with a dishwasher, a cooker, hob, extractor, sinks, etc. And the reason we provided a lot of this material is that a lot of our buyers wouldn't be able to afford to set up their own kitchens. It also meant that when we were going for eco homes or co-sustainable homes, we could say that we've got induction hobs, which are low energy use. We've got dishwashers, which means it's low water use, and we could prove that we were sustainable and that these units could work. So also going through to councils, we had to prove that we could actually build these little homes. And so this was our first scheme, Jeff Marsh Court, which is 22 homes. And this was actually really instrumental in delivering other homes for us, because we kept one of the flats as a show flat. And this is up in Camden. And so you can see it pretty much did everything we wanted it to do. One-on-one cycle parking. It produced really safe homes, even down to this little wall in the front. When I got on board, the scheme already had planning, and the planners had insisted on a steel on edge beam, so a square beam that went around as part of the garden wall. And I said, look, this is antisocial. I called up my planning advisors and I said, look, I don't want to build this. What can I do? And they said, well, you can do anything you like as long as the garden wall is under 1 meter high. And I said to the architects, right, we're going to build this so that people can sit on it. And half my colleagues fainted, and the design team went, what? What, are you insane? And I said, look, there's a Muslim school over the road, and I want them to engage with this. And the young guys come along and they sit on that wall, eat chips, and then they go into the school. And there's been no graffiti, no vandalizing of this scheme, because it allows it to engage with the community, not only within the community that lives there, but also the community that lives outside it. And I think it's very important to make sure that the developments that you do have a positive outlook, both inwards and outwards, to the community that they set in. Scheme. So this scheme was on an old petrol station. It's not far from Heathrow, and every level on this you can use. And actually, if you're on the top level, the airplanes come in so low you can tickle the bellies of the airplane. It's insane. Here we had to provide 2 car parking spaces against our wishes, but you can see the sale price is 150 to 166,000 pounds. And on this scheme, the first flat where we had somebody express an interest was for somebody's parents who was looking to downsize. So these flats are very much intergenerational. This was a much larger scheme, 34 flats. It was a nightmare. Just behind the block is the district line going out to Heathrow Airport. And if you dropped any materials onto the tracks, they would charge you £10,000 for the joy of doing that per hour. So we had to increase the piling mats for the cranes, etc., and have people inspecting these all the time. This one came out to level 3, which is not too bad for this kind of area. Apex Court was one of the last ones I delivered for Pocket. The reason I put it in, it's an old building that we refurbished. It was an old BBC workshop, but to make it work because of our JV partner, what they wanted back in terms of land value and profit, we ended up with 6 open market flats. And it was actually an excellent test bed for us, because it allowed us to prove that open market and affordable housing could sit together. And we had Savills value these open market flats, and they came out and they were sold at Savills values. And so it's a very tight urban area. Again, it's one-on-one parking. It's in West London, so it's a great site and it works incredibly well. And just to give you an idea of the density and how you have to stitch these in, so the red line is the marker around the site. You can just see how tight it was, ensuring that there's no overlooking, still getting the solar PVs on the roofs, etc., landscape on the top, landscape grow your own planter beds, etc. And this is the type of tight urban environment that we work in. So not too different from Durban and other cities around South Africa. And so Fermor Road, this was probably the most exemplar scheme that we worked on. So you can see the top right image was an old print works, and we worked on it as a joint venture with Land Securities, who are one of London's biggest developers, mainly on commercial land. They wanted an affordable offset for one of their shopping centres on Oxford Street. So they said to us, can you deliver the housing for us? And we said, sure. And if you look at the image on the bottom right, in the very right-hand corner, this is a very typical Victorian housing model where you have little front gardens. And so what we wanted to do was replicate a lot of this. The housing at the back that you can see in James Collins Close is it's also affordable housing, but it's for vulnerable people. So people who've been in abusive relationships, people with mental health issues, etc. So I spent the month before we started even going to planning or getting the design team on board, talking to the people who live there and their representatives. And that process continued throughout the planning process, construction process, and even through sales, because it was important to take on board their concerns. They were worried, for example, that, well, that's the next slide because it shows a bit better. They were worried that the housing that we were producing, there would be a big blank wall between them and us. And I assured them that no, we wouldn't do that. They'd be able to talk to our residents over the wall. And so we made very little difference between the front and the back of the block. On this one, we managed to put in ground source heat pumps. There's solar PVs on the roof. There's a lift, which I don't like putting the lifts because it adds a cost of about £100 a month to the service charges. But part of the process was that we could then offset the cost because the amount of money we sell the electricity to the grid offset a lot of their costs. And as you can see, this is a dark brick building. And I said to the architects, look, we need delight in this. So they chose the office color to do the soffits as green, but it just does help show some delight when you're coming home. And what we wanted to do is make sure that all our developments are safe, and not only be safe, but feel safe to people, any vulnerable residents. So all the entrance lobbies are open and light like this. We went to the local print studio around the corner and got them to provide prints, and there's a little fund of money that allows the residents to go back to the print studio and rotate those prints. It also means that people can have meetings. We have, as you can see, the orange element in there is an open access notice board. So if you're selling your bicycle, you can put in a notice in there, say, I'm selling my bicycle, and off you go. And the top picture is the roof terrace. It has spectacular views. We set up planter beds in it, and we said to the residents, if you want to grow your own herbs or vegetables, whatever, you can do it. And they said, well, how do we get an allocation? I said, talk to your neighbours, talk to your fellow residents. We're not here to determine who does what in your block, because we want to empower people to have ownership of it. So that goes even as far as the management of the block goes. That was handed over to the residents. So we start the first 2 years. First year, you have to do a contract with a managing agent who looks after the block, but then the residents in the second year can choose to continue the contract or find somebody else. And because you're trying to empower them as much as possible to own that block, because it does a number of things. One, it empowers them, but it also means it reduces ASB because you've got an investment in your home. And so what we do is we give people things that they can then start developing and doing together. So the corridors aren't locked off. They can go and talk to their neighbors. You can have these communal spaces. The sun lounge that you see there, I stole the sofa from the show flat and put it in there to start the process. Excuse me. And we give them hints. So we say, well, you know, in other blocks there we have safari parties, and so the idea is that you start in one flat with a starter, and the next flat you go for the main course, and then the next flat you go for the desserts, etc. And it just helps to create a community. So the first scheme that I showed, the Jeff Marsh Court, they've got a book club, they go skiing together, etc. So these things do work. So this is the interiors, and you can see how the little plan is almost exactly the same as that little model, except the kitchen is split in two, but it still has the same facilities in it. On this scheme, we had the bicycle as part of the bicycle park as part of the flat. And the other little cupboard that opens onto the corridor is where all the electrical meters are, water meters. So you don't have to be home for your meters to be read. It also means that for more vulnerable people, if your electrical company is going to read the meter, they don't have to come into your flat. They can do it from the outside. But we try to make the flat as blank canvas as much as possible. So very typical, very architectural, white walls, laminated timber floors, etc. But allows people to do what they want with the flats. And so this is a flat today. This just one that's being sold. And you can see people create bright interiors. On the garden walls, we did the same thing with that Victorian garden wall idea, and people putting their own plants. They create color. They do what they want to do within them, and they've clearly put in some seating on the outside so they can use it communally. They even have barbecues up there. You can see Trillick Tower on the right-hand side, and in the distance is the arch of Wembley Stadium. So the Fermor Road data, the site cost was £1 million, and as I said before, that it was cost of 3.2 million. That's 32 flats, £100,000 a flat. That's now going to be 6.5 million pounds. It's extortionate, and it's making it very, very hard to deliver affordable housing. But we threw everything at it. It's lightweight steel structure. So if we can just go back a couple of slides. That tower on the corner, those 4 flats were built in one day. The structure for them. And it's basically like a huge Meccano set. You put up the 4 walls, cementatious board that goes down, and you can start working on the flat below it. And then the next steel structure goes up and up and up. And then you start to fill in all the plumbing and electrics, and only afterwards do you start to fill in the walls. So as I said, we got code. The highest level is Code for Sustainable Homes level 5. We got Code for Sustainable level 4 on this secure by design, which it means that the police have ensured that the door locks, etc., the doors, etc., are safe, entrance ways, etc., safe, even down to the letterbox. The post person drops the letters from the outside, and you collect the post from the inside. What I really liked about the architects is they're a very ethical company as well. They have a mandate that 50% of the company are women. And they hold to that. And this was their first RIBA award that they won for it. We were forced to. This scheme is in Westminster, and they have a belief that you have a birthright to a 4x4. And we said we didn't want to put in any car parking. We showed that we'd lose 6 flats, which would make the scheme unviable. It also meant that we would have a sterile external environment, and we didn't want that. We wanted active engagement with the street. They relented in the end, even though the transport officer said that he rejected the scheme. It still went through. So instead, we put in lifetime membership for a car club for every for the flat. It's not for the resident themselves. It's the flat gets it, so it's in perpetuity. We sold the flats at an average of £180,000 for Zone 1 in London. That's dirt cheap. The housing model here is not a great one because it's now up to £390,000, which is not affordable to anybody. So I left Pocket, and partly because I wanted to change what we were doing and they didn't want to do it. I wanted to create affordable 1-bed and 2-bed flats, and also create an affordability that ran across a number of income options. So I spent about 3 months working on how to do this, and then having to get it passed by the GLA and Homes England. And basically, it said that, and I have a neighbour who's a nurse, and the income for a nurse in London is £30,000. Excuse me, and they have no housing options. So what I wanted to do was try and work out whether you can create an affordable housing model that competes in the market with 4 tiers. So the bottom tier is the Mayor of London threshold, which is pretty high, and it changes year on year because it's index linked. But I worked out these 4 tiers. They approved this, and they said, go for it, see if you can find a flat site and dirt. So the GLA had a small sites campaign where they let these out. I put in a bid for this site, which is huge, 108 flats, 100% affordability, and you can see the range of flats that I was able to put into it. I was second bidder on this. My land value was higher than the first bidder, but the legislation they wanted was a community land trust and community housing, and they felt that their group would deliver that more succinctly than I did, but it just did prove that you could compete in the land market and also deliver housing to these different tiers. This is another GLA site. It's small, as you can see. It's a little park, squirrels, dog walkers, something the GLA didn't consider, and they didn't speak. And it was also part of Transport for London. They hadn't spoken to the local council to see whether it could actually take housing. But it's a tiny site. An open market developer would be below the threshold for affordable housing. So at the time, that was 7 homes. And I said, okay, 7 homes, we're going over that. We're going for 28 homes, and I won the site. And the affordability tiers weren't as much as I'd like it to be, but because it was a tight site, I still was able to create some tiers of affordability. And there's a mix between 38 square meter one-bed flats and 50 square meter flats. And we won the site. I then pointed out that the site was a park, and that we should speak to the local council. The local council said, over our slowly rotting corpse, will you build on this so it's still a park? But it did still prove that you can do this, and the little plans show that the red ones, the dark red ones, are 50 square meter flats, and the 38 square meters, the pink ones. There's a massive tree which we couldn't get rid of, so I kept that and set them back. Set the flats back. Sorry. So it allows us to still keep that park element going. And so what's next for me? I've recently been asked to have a look at a council block in East London. And as you can see, that's some of the residents being towed away by the police. They're drug dealers. The local councillor wrote to all the residents and said, you live in a slum, and so we're going to demolish your home. And then realised they didn't have the £200 million to do that. And the top right-hand picture is of a resident who is mopping the stairs from excrement. So they asked me whether they could be resurrected, and I said, yes, of course it can. It's good, strong architecture, but we need to consult with the residents. So we spent 3.5 hours recently talking to the residents, and they were very much up for it because they realised they're not going to get new homes. We have to deal with drugs. We have to empower the residents, look at the aspects. Those grey elements that you can see there are automatic opening vents from the shopping centre that's below it. And so we need to work on it and create a delightful place for people to live. So this is a sketch scheme that I've put together for them, which shows that you can landscape it, change the colour of those stairwells to something more positive, both internally and externally. Grow your own planted beds. They've got a little community centre, which is just there. Create a proper space for it, create tranquil spaces, and improve wayfinding around the site. And so we're having a meeting with the council head shortly to discuss this. And so this is just gone a bit quickly. So you can see the South Bank Centre does something quite similar, highlighting stairwells in a brutalist architecture environments, and you can create colour by lighting, etc. And also treating it as if it was an open market development. So create these clear pathways for safety, active zones, passive zones, etc., so the kids can play and socialise. And this is a sign that if you go to the Barbican, which is 100% open market, all the things you're not allowed to do. And each time, like in COVID, somebody turned up to practice their trumpet, so they had to extend the sign to know their trumpet playing, please. I say more yes and less no. We need to do more and empower more people to be active participants in their environments. And so on the last one, I just wanted to reiterate, and I know there's a lot of architects listening to this, but the SAI, it's now the SAI KZN Bursary Fund we're running out of funds quickly because we're funding at least 10 students each year. I'm sure Skura can say more about that. But we really need funds, and please donate. I know that there are tax breaks that you can get in South Africa to be able to donate. So if you speak to your business managers or your accountants, please see what you can do to donate to the local branch. The need is desperate, and there's a lot of students who aren't able to afford their second part of their, particularly second part of their degrees, and any financial help, and also mentoring if you can do it. And the last slide is just really the references, which are there if anybody wants to have a look at them. And I really do recommend some of these books, particularly How Migration Really Works by Heinda Haas, who's got a PhD in this, and it really does show it. And if you haven't seen Vilo's video, which relates to what I've been talking about, which is density and giving people dignity back and safety and security, do watch that because it does relate to what I've been talking about today. And that's the end of my talk. Let's see, I'm a few minutes shy of the full amount of time to talk, but if anybody's got questions, please do share.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Thank you so much, Peter. And indeed, thank you for the bursary funds that you partnered with the Institute for. We will share those details with our members again. For everyone who's not aware, the bursary fund is for DUT and UKZN students to apply for financial assistance. You must be registered at those institutions first for you to be considered. Yeah, I think it has made so much difference in many students' life, Peter. Thank you so much. Peter, my question will start from your last project in terms of we have a lot of problems in Durban with buildings that have been hijacked, that have been taken over by people who are involved in crime and all of that. So repurposing is actually quite a huge drive with public works currently. Do you have the same problem in London?
Not to that extent, but we do have issues with drug dealers. And what happens is they tend to let their clients in and they then take over stairwells. It happened where I live. People were smoking crack cocaine in the stairwells every Friday and Saturday night. I used to go out with a bucket of hot water with bleach in it, and I'd bleach the stairs and then moved on. But in that particular scheme, I have already spoken to the local councillors and said, look, what we need to do is you can't just throw these people out. What you need to do is we need to go and speak to them with mental health counsellors, with substance abuse workers, and the police and the housing officers, and all of them need to resolve this, because you can't really make somebody homeless, but you can give them life options. And of course, if they choose not to follow that path, then that life option is eventually eviction or prison. But it takes time. It can take a couple of years to deal with it, unless, of course, there's more extreme issues like the use of guns or knives and stuff, in which case the police can come in and they can just arrest somebody. But there are processes in place. They just need to be put in place. And the sad thing is, for a lot of those estates, the local councils give up on them. You can see that estate's had no work done on it for a long, long time. There's not a single green leaf on the entire estate. It's shocking. And things fall apart. And so people see that their estate isn't looked after and they abuse it. They reflect what's been done to them on their estate.
It's good to hear a developer, Peter, talking about positive spaces, etc. Developers always worry about density and everything, and not so much the actual living experience of the people. But on the other hand, do you feel turning from architecture into property development is kind of a sustainable way in terms of a career? Because as an architect, you have to wait for a client to commission you. You have to tender and all of that. creating work, do you feel it's something that has made sure that in your side, your career goes longer and kind of more sustainable
I'm not sure
if you
it's
create your own work, essentially?
yeah. I mean, it really has been useful. A lot of people who work in housing provision in this country are surveyors, and they don't have the training that architects have, that sensitivity to place and placemaking that you talk about. And so often it isn't seen as a valued element. But really, particularly because a lot of our product is sold, if you don't create a positive environment, it's going to be very hard to sell. I mean, despite the fact that we have this huge waiting list, and we actually have problems with buyers getting mortgages too soon, and we have to delay them to the point, really that we've completed on the contract. It's been very useful to be able to select the right architects to do the right work in the right place. And that for me has been one of the real keys to understanding how architects work. And that was but also at the university. But in terms of longevity as a career, I don't know. The market here has become so difficult that it's financially unsustainable. And unless something changes, people like myself and many others will fall out of the market. So it's not that sustainable, primarily because of the money.
Yeah, yeah. Colleagues, I'm open to questions and comments for Peter. Mike?
Hi, Peter. Thanks. Really very interesting discussion. If you could just go back to your one slide, it was one of the housing schemes, I think about 2012, 2013, the one that you got the RIBA awards on. You had some figures for values there. Are those figures now figures or then figures?
Then figures.
I think it had an RIBA award, or it got an award of some sort.
Yeah, it's one. Sorry, I'm trying to minimize this, and I'm not sure how to do it. Yeah, let me scroll up to it. It's won the RIBA awards and 2 Evening Standard awards. Evening Standard is a newspaper here that. Oh, I'm not scrolling, but.
Would you like Kiara to project for you? Are you able to project Kiara on your side?
Is it working?
Sorry to be a pain, but
Is it
Not right now. Peter, we can't see your screen. If you can just try sharing it again.
How do I do that? Sorry,
don't worry, Peter. Really, it's not
being a little bit slow. It's an old beast.
It's not a big issue. It was really, when I looked, I think it had figures of £180,000. Would it
Yes,
be?
there was the average sales price. So each flat has a slightly different price point. But we
was
were
it a then price or a now price?
that was the then price, 180,000.
So what would that be today? Because
the prices now, those flats are going for about £340,000.
Sure. Still hell of a price. Thanks.
Yes, it's very expensive. Living in London, house prices are vast, and it's unaffordable to the vast majority of people.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Ken?
Thanks, Gura. Hello, Peter. You really swamped us with a huge amount of information, and I'll have to look at the recording several times to take it in. But tell me, going back a number of decades, has there been any attempt in London to harness the efforts and energies of individuals in finishing units as a way of spreading responsibilities and costs, i.e. self-help? Maybe not self-build, but self-finish. Any attempt there?
There is,
as per Nicholas Habraken and even John Turner.
There's a big movement for self-build, and it's been given government funding. We did look at creating a shell for flat, but it was pretty clear that our buyers didn't have the skill sets to complete that properly. So we moved away from that. But there's a big movement on self-build.
Okay. And, following on from that, are the standards being set by the country, by the city, too high for the lowest third of the income ladder?
I don't believe that's the problem. Sorry, can you see the screen now? I think it's worked.
Yeah.
I don't think that's actually the problem in terms of delivering housing, because the core costs aren't necessarily in the finish. The finishing costs are quite small. What the country's done, and it's both in government legislation and local city legislation, is to create minimum housing standards. So they are size standards. There are other kind of standards that have come out in terms of what a kitchen should be, etc. But that is really to protect against the bottom end of the housing market, to ensure that you don't get slum landlords, etc., and sizes being too small. I don't believe that is the reason why we aren't getting the housing and that we need. We just haven't built them for a long time, and our planning legislation hasn't helped that. So on this scheme, the Firma Road scheme, I spent more money on getting planning than I did on the brickwork, which is insane. And it shouldn't be like that. And you'd spend that money without ever being sure that you would get planning.
Final question, Peter, if I may, before passing it on. Is London particularly unusual within the UK in terms of these requirements and costs? Or does the problem spread throughout the UK?
It's pretty much spread throughout the UK. I mean, way back when, sort of 18 years ago, we looked at a site in Oxford on the very periphery, and that didn't work primarily because the very local sales prices were so low we couldn't actually build a 1-bed or 2-bed flat for the same price you could buy one. But things have changed. The construction costs, as you can see, have gone up over 100% in this time period. The costs just are too high. So everywhere, Manchester, Newcastle, Leeds, Bath, Birmingham, anywhere you care to name, it's the same problem. And it's not just a UK-based problem. This is a problem felt through most of Europe and most of Europe's major cities. For my sins, I go to a lot of lectures at the LSE, and the same issues to deal with, and it's part to do with migration and urbanization, but whether it's Barcelona or Berlin, they're having the same housing problems. Amsterdam, you name it, it's similar sort of issues.
Well, unfortunately, nothing compared to the scale of our housing problems. But anyway, thank you once again.
No, but I mean, as I said early on in the presentation, it's about the will to do it. You know, places like China have pretty much cured their housing problem. This country did it after the Second World War when they said it's an emergency. We have to deal with it like that. And it pays dividends. It pays dividends in terms of your country's economy to have people in good housing, because they can have the families that you need, and you don't end up in our situation.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. President Monique Gillespie.
Hi, Peter.
Hello.
Thank you so much for sharing with us your extensive knowledge on affordable housing. I especially, your experience with, well, I mean, as Skuro said, we have a lot of inner city and periphery city issues, and that whole sort of regeneration and repurposing together with placemaking, and not just doing the basics, but just using design skills to make spaces safe and happy places to live. I think that's really, I think, going to reach out and touch a lot of our designers here.
And
I also want
if I
to
could also interject, and not just
sure.
places to live, but also places to work. So the refurbishment of the area around King's Cross, which was a bit of a nightmare place, the developer, their first mandate, and this is an office area where you have Google, etc., said this place must be a place where children can play. And that seems a bizarre thing to say about an office area, but the proof is in the pudding. It's an amazing place to go, even at night. So the nighttime economy is now positive, but it's also a really positive place to work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a holistic approach rather than just going in and, I mean, obviously one has to deal with the criminal element, but it's better than going in and with a sort of a sweeping hand and just thinking about the bricks and the mortar and the concrete. So I think bringing the human element in is extremely important. So we really thank you for that. And also thank you for your part in setting up our bursary fund. That's really Peter's become one of our family now, even though he's living across the pond. We consider him a brother in our institute. So thank you so much for your generosity and for your continued input.
You're most welcome. By the way, just on the elements to do with the drugs, it's easy to point at, particularly here in London, at drug users, and we've got a lot of homeless people, and say, they're just drug addicts, but actually you find that a lot of these people have very severe mental health issues. A lot of them are ex-military, ex-police, etc., who've come out of those situations and have no options. And we're actually starting to find a lot of homeless people, particularly post-COVID, are people who are in the construction industry. We've had an extremely high suicide rate amongst men in construction. And a bit of humanity goes a long way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the target is really to eradicate the dealers, the people who are pushing their own profitable agenda, rather than to target the users, which, as you say, I mean, they are people with problems, big problems.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Monique. Dr. Govender?
Peter, thank you so much for the presentation. So we're currently working with a university in London, looking at how we can repurpose materials to create this material repository. I think it's quite interesting because then it talks to self-build and how people don't have money for materials to extend their homes, or if they need extra space. So I think it's quite an interesting one. We touched on it when we met, and I think we'll definitely try and bring you on board. I think it's quite an interesting project, which we're going to test in London and then try and bring it to South Africa to see how we can implement it here. But
That's a very interesting points. The guys who delivered the scheme that was on the petrol station near Heathrow Airport, one of them has gone into the study specifically, stopped doing everything, and his son actually dropped out of Cambridge University to work with him on the circular economy within the construction industry, and ensuring that things like timber beams, particularly glulam beams, are sized such that they have a reuse value and potential, even down to facades, which you can rent rather than buy a facade. So if you're putting up an office block and you want to convert it into residential, you can say, well, thanks very much for the facade and the lift, but we need a different lift and different facade. And the owners take that back, recycle it, and you get a new facade.
yeah, I think the circular economy is the way we need to go to, no wastage at all. And Peter, thank you very much for being the selfless person you are. I think you've touched so many of our students' lives. You know, we can't even, yeah, it's just incredible. Really, thank you so much.
It's very kind of you to say that. I'm not sure I'm that selfless. It was a great opportunity to pass on some funds which I felt would have a better life than just lining my pockets, and having that opportunity to do that was what made it possible. So,
thanks, Pieter.
Thank you, Philo. Any other questions and comment? I do share a sentiment, by the way, Peter, of trying to avoid lifts in buildings. In actual fact, if you look at it, if someone has special needs, you are better off on the ground floor in terms of escape and all that.
it's not just that. It's really interesting you raised that. When we were doing the scheme in West London, we had to provide one which was wheelchair based, and I went to the local council and I said, we can do this, but the chances of anybody buying a wheelchair accessible unit is zero. And we marketed that flat for 6 months in disabilities magazines, etc. The one thing that I highlighted to the council at the time was the wheelchair users make up 1%. Sorry, they make up 10% of the disabled population. So 90% of the disabled population are ignored by legislation, and that is shocking. So that includes people with learning difficulties, mental health issues, visual impairments, hearing impairments, and nothing is provided for them. And if we can create a fund that can then convert the home for that person's specific needs, we're doing a lot better with the same money. Otherwise, we're just wasting money. And in so many developments here, you have to provide a percentage of the homes as wheelchair accessible. No one ever uses them. And if somebody does, it's never built to their need, which is crazy. So it's just a waste of money. I agree with you. There's far better ways of dealing with people with disabilities.
Thanks, Peter. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Guru, and thanks very much, Peter, for your presentation. I just wanted to say a few words. A few of us on the call, I see Ruben's name here, I see Frank Rates now on the thing, and so just to let others who don't know you know that we've known you for over 40 years.
And you didn't have to say that.
In those 40 years,
of course we had to.
as students, and in fact, every decade that we've known you, you have always been and stood up for the less fortunate in whatever community you've been in, locally in Durban, I'm talking about, and overseas as well. So I think that's a big plus. And then to link it to the affordable housing, I don't think many will know that your first plan with this inheritance that you received, that you've now given to architectural people and students in particular, you had looked at affordable housing for students, and you were looking at a number of houses around Durban that could house the architectural students. So massive kudos to you. Thank you so much. And
thank you, Kevin.
We love to know as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other comment, question? Right. Now, Peter, thank you so much for a presentation today. I think it was eye-opening, and giving us an opportunity to compare what we are doing in this country with what you've achieved. Any closing statements from your side?
Other than please do donate for the students. I suppose the real takeaway from me is that it's about how you approach issues. And so much of affordable housing is approached from a de minimis position, rather than how good can we make this and how sustainable can we make this environment. And I mean, this wasn't as if we were working with huge funds. We were very tight funds to deliver these projects. But if you go in with the will and say collectively to the design team, this is what we're going to do, and this is what I'm expecting, you can achieve so much more by just extending out a bit and saying, how do we do this? How good can we make this space, and how can we empower people within our homes, within these homes, to create the best possible thing you can, rather than just do enough. And I think that for me is the big takeaway. Go the extra mile. You'll find people will follow you.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much, Peter. And then, colleagues, I did see a comment on the chat box from a student on how to get information on the bursary. For UKZN, please contact the Viloshan governor, and for DUT, please contact Andy Lengapai. We communicate through those representatives for the bursary. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you again, Peter, for the presentation and being a friend of the Institute. Thank you.
Thank you very much for hosting me, and thanks for all the very kind words. And the work that you guys are doing is amazing. It blows my socks off at just how much you give back to the profession and the students. It's brilliant.
Lovely.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much, Peter. I really appreciate this. Cheers.
Cheers, Ruben. Cheers,
Thanks,
everyone.
Peter. Thanks,
Okay.
Guru. Bye.
Bye.